folks. Check, check. Run up time has begun. Run up time. Yeah. Alright, here we are. Howdy, folks. How y'all doing today? Ooga chaka. Howdy, everybody. We is on. Alright, 7 minutes till official start up time. How's it sound? Everything sounding okay? Cool. It's funny, it says 0 people watching, but I see people in the chat, so YouTube is just being a dirty liar right now. Do 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 do. Fun stuff. Gonna have some fun stuff today. Yeah. Oh, I've been looking forward to this. This is gonna be some fun. Yep. Go ahead and get all this stuff started. Load it up. And I'm gonna chill for a couple minutes before I restart yonder streamage. So y'all can just hang back with me for a bit. Oh. Yep. So checking the stream. It's funny. I always dig a few minutes before this because I'll just sit here and like noodle on a guitar until time to start. I know it's probably weird, but it calms my nerves. Oh, 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes until we start. I'm digging any excuse I can find to play my guitar right now. So I injured a couple of fingers 2 weeks ago doing martial arts stuff, and it's been really painful to try and play. It's finally getting back to where I can really cut loose. Of course, I'm not using the same mic that I was a while back, so you guys probably can't even hear what I'm doing, which is fine, because it's just me noodling around until time to actually start. All right, it is time. It is 5 o'clock, and we are rolling with another of our CGBytes content artist development seminars. For those who may be first-timers here, I am Les Garner, known by some under the name 6S1, which is kind of a misnomer because it is 6S1 Media. I am just an artist. 6S1 Media is the name of the studio, and CGBytes is the company who is bringing you these lovely weekly seminars where we go into all kinds of cool stuff about doing content development, building 3D content, digging into different facets of the 3D content production profession, and yeah, all kinds of cool stuff. So for those who may be kind of late joining us, the last few weeks we've actually been we took a look away from production and really dealt more with the business side of things. So you can find the rewatches of those on the CGBytes YouTube channel, which hopefully you're on right now if you're watching this. So really cool stuff that we did there for the last few weeks, kind of looking at some facets of this that folks don't really talk about a whole lot. So where we are now, today is kicking off a new series where we are going to revisit a line of products that I created for CGBytes, or I say we created. It was actually my son and I in the studio here, created for CGBytes, that kind of rolled out over the last year or so, called Dark Void. It's kind of sci-fi themed stuff. It's really cool, fun. It was fun. It was just fun. It was a fun, hard sci-fi themed product line that I'm really proud of. Really proud of the work that we put in on it. It was a number of environments or scene kits, ship building kits, some outfits, and then this one creature, probably one of my favorite creatures I've ever done, the Amalgamate, Amalgamate 4079. That was an intense creature, really crazy stuff on that thing. So anyway, Dark Void was a lot of fun, And so I decided to kind of look at some topics that folks ask me about on a semi-regular basis regarding, modeling and going back into some of the production-related stuff that we do. So I decided we're going to focus on some hard surface modeling and really go from concept to completion on an original mech. So hopefully everyone here kind of knows what a mech is, or at least when I say mech, I'm thinking about things like BattleTech, all kinds of stuff that you see in anime. It's common throughout science fiction, the stuff with the mechanized walkers. Like, I'm a huge Star Wars nut, so I immediately think of like AT-ATs and ATSTs, stuff like that. So what we've got going on, and I've already gone ahead and kind of front-loaded this series with a lot of work, just getting this together so that I could kind of walk backwards through it and approach it a little differently than things I've taught before. What we have here is a design that I've put together. I call it the Dark Void ATW, All-Terrain Walker. So I'm going to walk down through these subtools here inside Zbrush, and for those who may not be familiar with what we do here, a huge amount of the work that we do is done inside Zbrush, although I do pretty regularly switch out to Maya. So a lot of times too, if I switch out to Maya, the things that you'll see me do in Maya are analogous to things you can also do inside Blender. And I'm pretty sure that there are one-to-one guides out there, actually. So like, if you see me do something, if I pop over into Maya for a minute at some point and you don't have Maya, but you want to use a free program that does most of the same stuff and does it really well, Blender is totally applicable, and you can oftentimes take things that you'll hear me say or see me do and actually Google the terms and things that you'll hear, and just Google, like, if it's UV shell Maya Blender, things like that. Put Maya and Blender in the same search, and a lot of times you will get different guides and things that will say, okay, if I'm going from Maya to Blender, this is this, this is this. I know it's an extra step, but I know Blender to a certain degree, but I don't do a lot of professional work with it for a whole laundry list of reasons. So really, for the sake of getting things done and staying kind of conceptually true and on point, I am from time to time, if I need to step out of ZBrush, I will probably go to Maya. Also, just about anything you see me do inside Maya, not only is it analogous to what you would do in Blender, but it has parallels in Modo, Modo, 3D Studio Max, Cinema 4D. At this point in the evolution of 3D as an art form, most of these programs do really about the same things. And so if you learn them, this is something I try to focus on a lot, is that if you learn them conceptually, don't be a slave to the interface. Learn conceptually. Try to learn things about edge flow, topology, UVs. Try to think. Try to get yourself in this mode of thinking that is conceptual, because then you'll be able to adapt very easily to different programs and different methodologies. So there's a lot of different tools that everybody uses. And if you move from the content world that we're dealing with predominantly here into into other aspects of professional 3D development, things like game development or film animation, things like that, then you're going to run into production pipelines where you have a lot of different software being used. And the more agile you are with your conceptual knowledge of 3D, the more you'll be able to adapt to any of those kind of things that come along. So that's just kind of a little piece of professional advice there. And also, you know, kind of a way for me to say, okay, guys, I'm going to be focusing. I'm going to be doing some stuff in Maya from time to time, and I don't want to have to try and shift out to a bunch of other programs. So if I go there, I'm going to go there conceptually and try to talk about things in that way. So what you have on screen right now is the ATW, the all-terrain walker. That is the next piece that we're installing in the Dark Void product line. If you guys dig this, if you dig the design of it, if you like the Dark Void product line, please let us know. You know, show us renders you may have done if you have any of the stuff, all that kind of stuff. We really like getting that feedback. And I personally, as kind of the guy, the Dark Void, a lot of it was my brainchild. You know, I really like getting that feedback, because it also tells me, not only does it tell me that you liked something, but if you like something, then that gives me more direction on where we can go with stuff in the future. And you know, the Dark Void is an itch that I've wanted to scratch again for a little while anyway. So let's you know, if you guys have some thoughts on any of that, please be sure to share, pop it in the chat, pop it in the comments below. So let's see. Where we're going to be starting off this week is with concept. So as you can see here, I already have a lot of topology, a lot of modeling done. Actually, I'm almost completely done with all the modeling in UVs for this. And then in the coming weeks, we're actually going to take a deep look at a lot of considerations along the way with those. And we have some cool freebies lined up for you in this series, like little bundles of like insert brushes and cool things like that to help you take Zbrush and do your own sci-fi mechanical sort of designs with it. Just kind of get a jump start on a lot of little bits and pieces. So the starting point for this, and I will pop back over to Daz Studio for just a moment, where I'm going to begin. First off, I need to load up my libraries that have everything in them that I've been working on with this. So let's see, where was I going with that? Yes, Mecha. Okay, cool. So, and where I'm going to start, okay, I made just a scratch pose here for the G3 female. And this pose actually adapts really well to either the male or female. But in designing a mech, I'm taking kind of a cue from things that I know a lot of car designers will do, and a starting point that people designing cars, trucks, whatever, you know, all kinds of different vehicles, they'll, rather than try to design the vehicle and shoehorn the driver to the vehicle, they will craft some form of comfortable or functional seating first. So that's where I like to start with these kind of ideas. So what I've done is I have this pose that kind of moves her, goes ahead and moves her up into place, and generally into a position that I want to work from. Okay, so let me just save what I have here, and then we'll send her over to Zbrush via GoZ. So here I've sent my figure over to Zbrush, and I'm going to show you guys some basic ideas here about roughing out that seating, roughing out some of those shapes that are going to go around it, and then kind of jumping forward from there to roughing out the overall shape and design of your mech, of your robotic sort of vehicle creature thing. So where I'll go from here is take this figure and duplicate it, which Control-Shift-D is the default key command for duplicating a subtool. So I'll duplicate it, and then I want to move it down in my subtool stack by one layer, which is Control-Shift down arrow. And the reason I'm making a duplicate is I'm going to Dynamesh this duplicate. That way I have something that I can cut from and pull from and do all kinds of wacky stuff to it. That's still going to fit very closely to the original form. So let's turn on Dynamesh, and let's give that a little bit of resolution. Okay, and here we can see 68,000 polys of resolution for it. Then I'm going to smooth that with some polish just a bit. Okay, and starting in this way, you can do a lot of really cool things with this. So I'm going to take a, we want the slice curve brush, okay, and let's just slice down this figure like so. Okay, so now we have the front and back kind of separated like that. And then from that, I'm going to make a mask from this back cut. And then we can extract that. And let's turn the thickness down a bit. I don't really need a whole lot of smoothing on that, so we'll set that to maybe 2. And then we'll extract that. Let's go a little thicker. There we go. Maybe even thicker than that. Let's go to 0.04. Pardon me. And then I'll accept that. So now I can arrow down, and here you see we have a nice negative shell created from that. Okay, and that shell is going to sit nice and snug to our figure. We could use that. We could do a lot of other things with it, and I'm going to kind of go for, like, I don't want a completely molded seat. What I want is something that's I don't know, just maybe has a little more shape to it. But still has kind of a utilitarian mechanical kind of feeling. Okay, so let's take this outer shell from it, and actually, you know what? I think I want to run that extract one more time. Okay, let's actually do this relatively small. Okay, now we'll arrow down. I'm going to grab that interior shell and make sure that it's masked while everything else is still visible. And now let's turn on some symmetry, and let's just expand. Might need to mask a little bit inside here too. Let's mask up the inside of the leg areas here. There we go. So now we can expand that out just a bit. And then let's mask that, and now let's mask everything except the inside of the legs. And we'll go to the inside with that. Okay, so I'm just using a transpose tool there. Transpose move tool. And that allows me to scoot those things around in that way. So now let's polish that once. And then let's add a bit more thickness to the back side of this. I'll grab an inflate brush. We have symmetry turned on, and let's just brush over that. Okay. And right now this is going to be a very organic sort of shape. We'll eventually be hardening that up. Okay. And you notice too that as I do this, I'm making sure that I'm actually pulling a lot of this mesh so that it's going to start filling in the middle, because in a moment we're going to dynamesh this, and then that's going to fill that in. Then we'll get a solid shape in between the character's legs there, so that we can really build out the rest of seat. So now that we have our general volume in place, I'm going to smooth a few things out there that I know I don't want artifacting and stuff from. Then maybe add just a little bit of inflate there. There's a lot you can do just like this. Then let's turn our resolution up, and we'll dynamesh this. And so now you should see we have this shell that fits our character very tightly. Okay. So here we have the shell. Next, I'm going to come around the shell with a clip curve and start giving it some nice mechanical sort of edges. And I might even grab an area like this, and let's just expand that out and then re-dynamesh it, and then I'm going to trim some of that. So let's do that. and that. And every once in a while we might need to just hide some stuff like that with the select lasso. And with the select lasso, for those who may not be completely up on your Zbrush key commands and everything, the select lasso, you hold the Control Shift key to go into select mode, and then you can then click on your brush palette to change what it's enabling. So if I hold Control Shift and I click here, I can choose select rectangle, select lasso, any of my slice curves, all of these different brushes here that are either selection or slice or clipping. Those are the three things that the Control Shift commands will enable. So here I'm going to use, I've got clip curve enabled again, and I'm going to delete hidden because I use the select lasso to draw a selection. Come here, select lasso. So, and if you hold Shift, Control Shift, and draw, it has a green overlay. That means you are showing something. If I hold Control Shift and draw, and then as I'm drawing, hit Alt, and I keep all the keys down, and then just add my thumb to the Alt key. So it's really strange. It actually would make more sense if you could see my hands, but my pinky is on Control, my ring finger on Shift, and then as I draw, I add my thumb to the Alt key. And then if I let go, that'll hide whatever was under that overlay. So let's re-Dynamesh that, which is just Control, click and drag in space if you have Dynamesh enabled. And now we'll polish this a bit more. Let's do a little bit of inflate right there. And you'll see whenever we Dynamesh it that it fills in that volume a little bit. So here we go. And we're Dynameshing and then polishing. And so now I'm going to go back through and kind of pull some things a bit and really hone the sort of mechanical nature of this seat that I want. So let's take our clip curve and we'll come around the shape like this. Okay, we're starting to get there. And every once in a while I'll just recalculate the Dynamesh. Okay, and if we turn on our transparency, I can see where the feet are, see where the figure underneath is, so I know, you know, if I want to harden any of this stuff up a bit, I can. And so far we have a nice start there to the shaping for a seating for a sci-fi sort of cockpit. So you'll see too that it still maintains the poly groups from all the different actions that I've done so far. So I'm going to take a moment and regroup this so that I have the back of the seat as its own group and the front as its own group. And the reason, just so you know, the reason I'm spending a lot of time on the seating is that the pose and the seating of a character in this sort of model are really integral to how you're going to design out the rest of it. You know, with anything that's going to be futuristic, there should be, at least in my opinion, a certain degree of ergonomics in the design. And with that kind of ergonomics, what you're going to look for is things that hug the body, that give the body appropriate places to move. So if you start with the pose, then by default, the things that you do are going to tend to be much more ergonomic. So we're going to take this volume now, this back volume, and I'm going to extrude that with my Move Transpose tool. Okay, and I'm going to do that like so. Actually, I want to mask off a little bit of the front here because I want to keep that toe where it was. Okay, and then we should be able, there we go. There we go. So once I have that extruded, then I'm going to go through and kind of harden the back of it so that we're ready for something that will kind of fit into a more mechanical environment. And then we'll remesh that, redynamesh that, and polish just a little bit. And it looks like I'm going to need to go through and just do a little bit of inflating, kind of return some of the volume. There we go. And every once in a while, I'll switch off and hit clay polish a few times, and you'll see how that kind of simplifies the shape. It tightens up the surface a bit. So here we have this nice ergonomic sort of chair for our pilot. And this is really just a design sculpt. This is a means of getting my ideas going, getting a general shape in place. This is by no means something that I would use as a final mesh right here. This is just spitballing. This is thinking, kind of thinking out loud on screen. Okay, so here I'm just taking a slice brush. I'm going to walk around this, and I'm probably going to end up with some strange looking cuts through the middle. Yeah, just like that. That's actually kind of an interesting thing too, because there are some ways that you could remesh that and do some neat stuff with that would provide some neat looking designy stuff inside the seating. Not going to go into all that right now, because that's not really something I personally am looking for in this design, and not something that I use. The seating that I have for this is already done. So let's see. Let's take the back of the seat that we have so far, regroup it, and then from here I think we want to make a couple of more cuts. So let's cut some nice straight lines into this that will give us a really good basis for pulling some other mechanical shapes out. And that's probably going to give us, there we go, it's going to give us some poly groups that we need to hide. Okay, so now I can take this group, and when you saw it flash colors there, it's because I hit Control E on my keyboard a couple of times, and that just adds an edge loop around it that's nice and smooth. And now I'll hit Control Shift G and regroup that stuff together. So then I'm going to regroup these polygons together. So now we have, again, we have our back and our front. Okay, and then I'm going to pull another extrusion from the back, and this time I'm going to take my Move Transpose tool and position it roughly toward the top so that I can pull that down, and you see that I'm building some thickness toward the bottom there. And then let's just mask all of this and pull forward. So now I've got enough thickness there to really build this chair, this pilot's chair. And you'll also notice too that because of the way I extruded that, I end up with, even though this is garbage topology, Dynamesh is always garbage topology, it's just for design. But still, when you extrude the way that I did using the Move tool and masking, the Move Transpose tool and masking, then that will almost always give us these a nice set of edge rings that we can hide or show or do some really cool things with. And that's what we're about to do here to increase our volume and give us a little bit more to work with for our design. Okay, so I'm going to auto group what is still visible there. So now we have a group for the back, a group for the front, and then we have this nice edge ring group running down the sides here. Now, most of the time if I'm using Dynamesh, I don't use ZModeler, but this is one of those cases where we can use ZModeler in a way that's a little different than what you might normally see. So I'm going to go into ZModeler, skip the note that comes up, that always comes up, and then I'm going to hold my brush over a polygon, hold the space bar down, and I'm going to change my function here, my polygon action, to extrude, and set my target to polygroup all. So then when I do that, I can interactively click and drag on that poly group. So now we get that large volume coming off the sides. Okay, and then we could do that again. We could keep doing that a few times if we wanted. Now I'm going to take my clip curve and just kind of hone this into some relatively straight angles here in the back. One more time. Okay, so now we know we have some nice straight surfaces there, and then we'll Dynamesh that. Okay, so now that we Dynamesh that, let's clay polish that a few times. And also, just a side note, at this point you could actually take all the techniques that I'm showing you here and apply them to something completely and wildly different than a mecha hard surface piece like what I'm about to show. You know, you could use this to design a sarcophagus. You could use this to design, I don't know, an Iron Maiden. You know, yay, Iron Maiden. You know, like a torture device. Anything that needs to fit the human form or fit a form. You know, if you have something that needs to socket into another object, or something that needs to fit inside a container or some receptacle of some sort, you can use these methods to generate that sort of negative space so that it'll fit very snugly in. And if you do it starting out with a pose that you've created, then you save that pose and you save the model, and they just work together from the get-go. That way you're not fighting later on nearly as much with having to fit a pose into what you've made. Okay, it's so much better to always kind of work in a way that kind of looks forward to problems you're going to have in the end, and try to circumvent those as early on as you can. And that's one of the things we've done here, starting with a pose and then working out from that this way. Okay, so let's take what we have here and just refine it a little bit more. We should have some poly groups here that we can clip into some nice flat surfaces. Okay. And then once more, we're going to Dynamesh that. I'll polish it, Dynamesh it again. Might need to clay polish it a couple times. And sometimes you get this little fringy stuff around the edges. Don't worry about that too much. If we polish that a few more times, and then Dynamesh it, and then we'll clay polish it, you should see all that stuff start to work itself out. So there we have kind of the basic design for a concept of a seat. And I might hold on to this and just make this available to you guys with all the other tools that we're going to be sharing. So, and I'll go through a lot of times at this point, if I'm working on hard surface stuff like this, and then start maybe bump my Dynamesh resolution up a little tiny bit so that I can get more resolution. Give that just a second. Okay, and then we'll polish it once. And so now from there, I might come through now and start adding interesting little details, little things that are just kind of little quirky things to kind of add some design, add a little bit of flair to it. So let's add in some padding, or the impression of some padding, just something to kind of guide us later on down the line. So let's take our masking brush, which you get by holding the control key. We'll hold control and we'll click on our masking brush, and let's grab a mask curve pen. And this is going to act a lot like a clip brush in that no, come back here. No, I did not want to do that. It's Dynameshing again. Here we go. Let's undo, undo, undo. There we go. Oh, there we go. That's So let's take our mask curve brush is what I want. Sorry. And you'll see that that acts a lot like those clip curve brushes. Okay. I hold control and I start drawing my curve. And if I hold shift, it'll lock that curve to 15-degree increments. And then when I let go, everything that's on the dark side of the gradient coming from the curve will be masked. So let's just do a little bit of masking. Now if I control, click, and drag with that, and then I hold Alt, Control, click, drag, holding shift to constrain it, and then I add the Alt key in, then that's going to remove masking from whatever is facing away. So here I'm just creating some masking, and if I add the space bar while I'm using a tool like this, then I can slide that around my screen to get a better position for it. Okay, so let's just take some of this. Now if I add the Alt key, say I hold Control and I start drawing, and then I let go and start adding the Alt key, then I'm creating curves. Okay. So now let's just make sure everything else is masked. And I want to do a little bit of masking right here, right below the feet, so we get a nice straight line. And then I actually want to mask off behind the legs there. So let's switch back to our mask pen. And so I want this to have kind of some hard edges to it. I'm going to turn my focal shift down to 0. And then let's just paint a stroke that I know is going to go right behind the legs. If I want, I can turn on my transparency too and just kind of use that as a little guide there. It's kind of a handy thing to do. Okay. Alright. So now if I put a move transpose tool out here and I control click the middle handle and drag, that's going to give me the ability to extrude those masked shapes. Okay. So now we get these little these kind of little shapes here. Now another way to add those kind of shapes that that I like, I actually probably do this more thinking about it. There's so many different ways to get to any end result inside ZBrush or any 3D modeling program, by the way, that it's very easy to kind of go, oh well, I could do it this way or I could do it that way. So when I'm showing you guys stuff, a lot of times I'm kind of pulling from techniques that I know and just kind of saying, okay, today I'm going to show you how to do it this way, because there could be so many different ways to do any one given thing. So let's see. So here, let's just let's take a look at another way of adding some of those shapes onto a surface like this, like for leather seating or a bucket seat, or something like we're doing here for a pilot. And I do think that I want to kind of restore how form-fitting this was to the figure just a little bit. So anytime that we want to do that, sometimes you get a little bit of shrinkage as you work with Dynamesh. So you might need to project some of some of those details back in eventually. So let's just go back to our original import here, and then let's do a project all. And it doesn't seem to be moving a whole lot, so I think that's good. There we go. And then we'll just shrink that back a little bit. And just an aside, I like to work with my polygroup colors on a lot, but I will often reach over here and click where it says line. That way the wireframe goes away, because especially if I'm in Dynamesh mode, I really don't need that wireframe there. Unless I'm going to do something specific, like when you saw me extrude those edge rings. Okay, so let's just do a little bit of quick sculpting here. We'll polish that out. Then I'm holding shift to smooth it. So now I know I've got a little bit more of a recess there for the figure. Okay, now let's smooth all of that a bit more. And then the other method that I was about to show for adding shape and volume to these things is using a topology brush. Okay, so let's say I want to do some kind of designy sort of stuff medical terms, coming down through like the groin area. Okay, so let's just add some topology being drawn in. So a lot of times folks will think about the topology brush as being just for creating topology, but really you can use it for creating volumes during your design phase. That is really pretty handy. So here I'm just drawing these volumes on, drawing these general outlines on, making sure that I follow the rules for the topology brush so that everything, so that I'm creating vertices where things intersect and all that. And for folks who might not be familiar with that topology brush, the way that it works is if I draw a line, and then I draw another line, if I draw lines that cross those, where they cross, where those curves cross each other, will create vertices, and eventually that'll allow us to create polygonal faces. So let's make a few more of these shapes. Let's just go through here like this. Okay. Don't really want that last one there. And then I'm holding the Alt key and drawing over a curve between two vertices in order to get rid of that. And now if I just tap, you'll see we get this nice little mesh that pops up, and the thickness of that is defined by our brush. So if I make my brush a little thicker, then I tap on the mesh, then those curves go away and they create this this mesh in place. So if I turn off all my masking previews and all that stuff, then I can see this. And we could go through and do some really neat designy stuff on here. So let's just kind of follow through with some of that. Let's add some curves here. Okay, and those curves are going to try to follow and stick to that surface. So now I should be able to draw down through there. Now you see how as I follow this contour of the surface, these are going to lock in there. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it gets a little confused. Okay. But then all those curves lock into place and we get that. And right now that's kind of chunky looking, which is fine because we can take those clean polygons it creates, and here you can see I'm going to turn my lines back on. We could take those clean polys that created and mask them, then invert it so that they are not masked. And so now I can take that, and this is just one way to create like maybe some armrests or some console on the sides or whatever. And I'm really just pulling that stuff out so that I'm using that topology that I drew in place to create some new volume. So, and I'm not worrying at all about that topology because it's all going to go away anyway. So now let's just re-dynamesh this, and you'll see it'll all merge together. And once it merges together, we could go through then and make some cuts. So let's just, oh, don't really care for where that's going to go. Let's hold Control Shift and start drawing with our slice tool. And then if I double tap the Alt key while I'm drawing, that will give me a hard corner in the curve. And actually I want to do that with the clip curve. And it's the same rule. Double tap with the Alt key. Alright. And sometimes you get some weird stuff there where it tries to squish things together when it clips. But this is just design phase stuff anyway, so it almost doesn't matter. But if you want to clean that stuff up, you can go through and select it, hide it, delete hidden, fill the holes, things like that, to help get rid of some of that stuff. Okay, so also if I mask everything except this area, then I can go through and use my clip brushes to tighten that up even further. So now let's Dynamesh. And then from there, I'm going to polish this a couple of times. And I might even want to grab just these poly groups and relax this stuff back a little bit using my smooth command. And now let's Dynamesh that one more time. And it's kind of a back and forth process of just smoothing, polishing, and Dynameshing. That's okay. Okay, so here, let's turn that off. Here you can see kind of where we're at with this particular concept of a seat, which I kind of like it. I like this actually as much as what I already have in place on this model, so it's kind of cool. Alright, and now let's just use a little bit of clay polish. So now we have something that would be great for tracing over to create finished topology. And I'm going to jump from here to the rest of my concepting now that I have a general seat in place. I'll switch over for a second and show you what the seating looks like in my finished model. Okay, and this is really where I'm heading with this stuff. Is I've built here. You can see I've built something that's a little more hard design, tighter shapes with the seating. And you can see here that I fleshed out all this cockpit. And if I turn off all of these, and then you can bring in the console and see what we have so far here as well. And a lot of the elements that you see present here are in the set of insert brushes that we're giving away soon to accompany this series. So it's pretty handy stuff. You can actually pull some of these elements and use little bits and pieces of them in your, as starters for your own models. Okay, so let's hide that and switch back over to where we were. So the next thing that I want to do is give myself a reference for my ground plane inside DS. So here my model is, or the figure is positioned up high because I knew I wanted to make a large, a large hulking sort of mechanical figure that's going to have the pilot up off the ground. So let's go to primitives and we'll add a plane. And oh, I have that facing the wrong way. So let's add a plane, and we want the primary axis to be Y positive. And that's going to give us that plane down on the ground. And then I'm just going to send that plane over to Zbrush via GoZ. So now we have an accurate representation of our ground plane brought over out of DAZ Studio. This also can be a great tool for working forward into our design. There's a couple of things that I want to do with this before we move on. I want to take my Z modeler and go ahead and extrude, and you'll see that that gives us an inverted volume. So after I've extruded that down, I need to flip faces. So I'll hold my space bar and change my polygon action to flip faces, and I'm going to set that to all polygons. And the reason I did it that way I extruded down so that I know that the top facing surface is still exactly where the ground was, but now I have thickness below it, so that I'm not wheeling around this thing and spinning around and looking, trying to look through transparent polygons. Plus having that thickness there gives me polygons that I can pull things from and do other things with as I work. So with that in mind, now we're going to use this to kind of define ourselves a volume. that we'll pull the rest of our general mech shape from. And there's so many different ways that we could go about designing this shape. And this is actually where it gets fun to me in building these kind of vehicles, these kind of hard surface sci-fi designs. Because where we can go with this, at this point, your imagination is just unlimited. What you can do with it is insane how far it can go. So let's take this volume for our ground plane, and let's which way do I want to go with this? Let's go ahead and mirror and weld it. That way I know I've got a perfect center line going through it. That way I can turn on symmetry and I can pull things from it and then use those as starting points for all kinds of stuff. So now I'm going to duplicate that subtool. Okay, so now I have plane with a 1 appended to it. And then I'm going to hide, hold Control Shift and click on that top facing poly group and hide the others, and then I'll delete hidden. And so now I'm going to take this poly group and subdivide it a handful of times so that I get enough resolution there that I can then do some masking. And I'll just delete my lower resolutions. So I want that high resolution plane there. And let's hide the original ground plane that I brought over. I'm going to turn off perspective. And now let's just let's take our, let's use the mask pen, focal shift set down to -100. Let's just kind of paint some general feet sort of in here, something that a mech might have. Okay, so let's just give ourselves some very rough shapes to mess around with. And then once I have those, I will extract them, and then I can arrow down to the new subtool created for those. So I actually don't need that created symmetrically right now. So I'm gonna delete by symmetry so that I have only one side, and then we're gonna dynamesh that. And hopefully I didn't go too high resolution with it. No, that's not bad. Actually, it is high. It's quite a bit high. So let's dynamesh that to something relatively, that's a bit low. Sometimes you got to play around with your dynamesh resolutions. There we go. So now that I have this blobby sort of volume here, I'm going to start honing this with my clip curves. And if I want the feet to be symmetrical in and of themselves, I can turn on local symmetry and then turn on symmetry by hitting X. And so now I can shape this and get this nice symmetrical mechanical volume worked out without it actually having to be truly symmetrical. So I'm working on one side of what will eventually be the final shape. Okay, and then let's dynamesh that, clay polish it. So now you can see we have a basic concept and a rough volume in place for what the feet are going to look like. So from there, let's just start playing around with this. I'll take the this top group, mask it, then invert that masking, and let's pull that up. And I could even right now, if I turn local symmetry back off and I mirror and weld, now you'll see we have two volumes in place for guiding where our feet are going to go. So now I'm going to mask that top group, and we can just drag that stuff a little bit, maybe do a little bit of shaping with it. This really is the fun part. So let's look at adding some general volumes that should help define the legs for us. I'm a big fan of back bent legs, not just in monsters, but also in mechanical designs, because it has some neat advantages in the way that you can make things feel like it could spring forward quickly or it could leap really far. So that's a very cool thing that I'm going to play with design-wise here. And I'm going to do that with a curve quad fill brush. So let's go up, back, forward, and maybe sweep this a little. There we go. Something like that. It's kind of an interesting shape to work with. Then I'll hit Shift F5 to clear off the curve that made. Now I'm using a transpose tool to thicken this out. And then I'm going to clip plane the bottom of that so that we have this stuff all in place. And then let's just hide everything except that, mask a little piece. And now we'll pull that tighter so that it comes in. And then let's just let's go ahead and Dynamesh this, see where that leads. All right, and then we'll polish that once. So now you see we have our volumes slammed together. Now I'm going to delete by symmetry, turn on my local symmetry again. So now I can work on both sides of this leg at once. So let's do a little bit of smoothing. And this is just a clay sort of rough. I'm not really worried about tons and tons of very mechanical details on this just yet. That kind of thing comes later, and really I save most of my mechanical details for when I'm doing topology, because if you're trying to do mechanical details with Dynamesh, first off, the Dynamesh is going to have shrinkage, and hard edges that you have in that are going to fall away, and it's going to be very frustrating. You're not going to get very far with that before you realize that it's not really what it's intended for. So the other reason that I will wait to do my mechanical details during topology is because I want to draw those things in very specifically. I want to make sure that I put hard edges where I need them, and it's far more intuitive to work that way. So and also as I'm working with topology, I will see lines in my topology that will act as a sort of a guide for my design. So I'll see lines that go different places and be like, oh, that line would make a good panel. Well, I could get that just by an extrusion, or I could do any number of things with that. And you'll see that stuff. Actually, you'll see that stuff, I think, next week when we look at topology and UVs for these kind of models. So one of the things that I have in mind, and if I pop over and show you my finished piece, or close to finished piece that we have here, one of the things that I have in mind is building these semi-organic shells around it that have some curvature to them, but then having mechanical elements inside as though those shells are like armor. I really like the aesthetic of that. That's something I'm a big fan of from things like Appleseed and other anime. So I want to sort of shoot for that. But when you have that kind of thing in mind, you can sculpt with that sort of shape at the beginning and not really worry about the mechanicals inside. It's a nice forgiving way to design something that looks believably sci-fi and looks believably mechanical without having to be a mechanical engineer, which I am not and never will be, have no desire to be. So I like these kind of designs though, because they do have a lot of actual function to them, especially in like combat related sort of vehicles, because those curved surfaces are going to deflect things certain ways and be pretty cool. And then we have the added benefit that it allows us to be artistic with it and do all kinds of cool stuff without having to worry too much about how by the booky we are with our mechanical whatnots. So let's go back over, and I'm going to start sculpting in then some details on this, and I'm also going to use some insert brushes just to add more volume and more kind of geometric sorts of volume. So let's take a sphere, just an insert sphere, and I'll just click and drag that guy right in here, and then we're going to use the move transpose tool to stretch that out a bit. And then I'm not really worrying about how much any of this stuff presses into anything else or any of that stuff. So now I've got those spheres there kind of guiding my way for the volume that I want. And I know that when I Dynamesh those again, if I have just those spheres there, those are going to give me a nice smooth shape. So let's go through and kind of get rid of some of the underlying shape that we started with now that we've traced something over it. Okay, so then there we go, and of course that is not wanting to play real nice right there. So we might have to kind of take a couple passes at that. There we go. Alright, so now I can re-Dynamesh that. Yeah, let's just polish that a time or two, then Dynamesh it again. And when I'm working on mechanical stuff, I hit clay polish quite a bit. Okay, so here you can see the shape that we're down to now. Of course, I have my symmetry turned on, and I'm smoothing just to kind of work out a little bit of that that center line. I really should have stretched those spheres a little bit more down the center to fill that in, but it's okay. We can just use a smooth brush to tweak that out. Okay, and just looking at that, you can see you can do a lot of really cool things with this. Let's add a couple of little shapes in here that should guide where our where some of the hinges, some of the axle sort of things, different moving parts. Let's add some shapes in here that are going to cover some of those. So I like this. I like having this sort of bulbous piece right there. And if I invert my masking, I could come in and even use my clip curve to start removing some stuff there. Do a lot of stuff with that. Right, so we've Dynameshed it. Let's polish it, and then we'll clay polish that. Right. Then let's take a look at an interesting little technique right here for making this stuff kind of rounded. I'm going to hide everything except part of this leg, and then hold Control Shift and we'll go to Clip Circle Center. And there you can see that if I drag that, if I hold Control Shift and drag with Clip Circle Center, it's going to do exactly that. It's going to round things off around the center of where I drag. So there we're starting to get some nice mechanical shape. Then another really popular method for hardening shapes and starting to build in those mechanical shapes is using an H-polish brush, which you'll see I use enough that I actually have it docked down here. So let's smooth some areas off and just take an H-polish brush and kind of work our way around, just seeing what it leads to. Pardon me. Right. So, and this is where we're starting to get into kind of some secondary forms. Maybe take a clay buildup and add some things in here. And then let's polish that, clay polish it. And it's interesting because if you keep hitting clay polish, you start getting a more mechanical look, at least in a design sense. It starts to show you some things. So I know this area right here is going to end up having some mechanical stuff show through in it. Then I'm going to guide myself with some mechanical area right here. Let's cut some away from this. Now let's really carve up in here and start giving ourselves a recess that we can use later to show some of those mechanical parts. So I'm going to re-dynamesh that, come back in and smooth some of this stuff out. It's a very iterative process. Sometimes when you get weird stuff happening like this, you could just mask it and hit Control W to make a group from it. Then I'll just invert that, delete hidden, and remesh, or redynamesh, recalculate the dynamesh, and it'll fill the hole in. So then we just sort of blot that stuff back out. Okay, so now I'm just doing some smoothing. Now let's, oh, excuse me, I did not mean to hit that. Let's polish, and then we will hit clay polish a few times. So here you can see we're starting to get at least a guide for a leg shape. Like I said, this isn't really for the purpose of doing finished modeling there. All I'm doing right now is spitballing some shapes, and I'm probably going to shift off of the leg soon because I've put enough time in it that my brain is starting to get a little fatigued at looking at that. So I'm going to move on here soon to working out a general shape, a general concept shape for the hull and engine area. So before I do that though, we are at the point in our session where we usually take a short break, an hour in. So I'm gonna call time for a minute, give everybody a second to stretch your legs, grab a drink, hear the call of nature, all that kind of cool stuff. And so I shall be back in just a couple of minutes to move into the next phase of our design sculpt on this. So I shall return. You kids play nice with each other while I'm gone, will you? Alright folks, I have returned. Can everybody hear me alright? I flipped my mic off and back on, so let me know if there's any weirdness with the audio for a moment. So, I am back with a trusty drink in hand and ready to move on into hour number 2 of our June 10th. It is the 10th. Yeah, today's the 10th. June 10th edition of the Artist Development Seminars. Yes. Necesito de agua. I have horrible Spanish, but there you go. I have my water. All right. Can you folks hear me? Can you hear me? Somebody say something. Okay. I'm going to start working, and if you guys don't hear me speaking, then let me know. So if you see things moving around and you don't hear me, somebody metaphorically shout in the chat. All right. Oh, good. Yeah, you can hear me typing. Then I know that it's on. That's great. Yeah, it's funny. The mic that I'm using now is great, but it has a mute button that's actually hard to tell. You hit the button and you're like, well, is this thing muted or not? So, all right. So let's move on to the next little section of this. Okay, I want to do a couple of quick things to this leg first. This leg shape, where I kind of condense it down. I'm going to squeeze that a little bit, and then we're going to turn off symmetry and move it out to the side just a bit. And then I want to I want to turn off my local symmetry and mirror and weld that. That way I can see a general shape for the two different leg pieces. And then sometimes looking at things, symmetrically like that for mechanical stuff is really beneficial, because you can then tell, I don't know, it's like it shows your brain different things. You can see different things that maybe you don't see as just the single side. So I think I do want to do a couple of quick little additions and changes to this while I'm symmetrical. Let's take the H polish brush and kind of take this back from being quite so organic. Just brush a few strokes over. And one of the neat things that I like here, let's go to a blend shader so that I can actually see some of the highlights and edging starting to happen here, is if I take my H polish brush, something nice and large, and I just brush across the surface, and then I hit 1 on my keyboard a couple times, it's going to repeat the stroke. And that's going to help us get these sort of mechanical shapes, or at least a guide to some mechanical shapes with some hard edges. So let's do that. And then I think I want to go here. Let's solo this out for these. Let's undo that just a little tiny bit. Right. Yeah. There we go. That's a nice one. Now let's move over here and do the outside. Actually, I might do that with what I'm thinking here, with a clip curve brush. So let's delete by symmetry, turn on our local symmetry, and turn off that perspective for just a minute. We'll do that this way. Let's just, I want to add some kind of shaping here that really builds on some mechanical ideas. Okay. So let's take our mask lasso, mask off some of this. So now that stuff there is all masked. We can do some really cool stuff with that. Let's. I like how those hard shapes start to emerge when you start clipping with it. It's kind of neat. And I like this flat shape right here. I would use that as like a gun port, or you know, a place to add some kind of forward-facing attachment. So now let's take a clay polish and kind of finish some of this going toward the back. And if I want that clay polish to really be even smoother, I can go to my stroke menu and turn on lazy mouse, and we'll keep that at the default radius of about 30. So then that's really going to affect a lot of how that brush works when I brush across a surface. And of course I'm also in local symmetry right now too. So it's a really great way to work with a mechanical concept. Okay. So I like that. I like the way that's starting to panel its way out. I think that's got a cool look to it. Now let's just let's clay polish that, and you'll see those edges really harden up. Let's polish it once, because I don't want those quite so hard, because it is still just design sculpt stuff. If I hit L on my keyboard, that's going to take my my brush. It's going to turn off the lazy mouse, so then I can come in and just kind of play around with ways to harden up shapes in different places. And I find that that's a really nice way to work out some ideas with hard surface modeling. It ends up very subtractive. It's much more like working with clay with your hands, because you're then just kind of peeling things away or pressing and pushing into stuff. But sometimes when you start doing that, you start to see opportunities for shapes in design that maybe hadn't dawned on you before. Like right here, I'm looking at this and I'm starting to really see a cool way to come through and carve this stuff out, and then maybe carve out up into here so that we get a recess, and then maybe we'd have some gadgets or something that show through right there. Let's take this lasso, mask off a little area there, and then we can really build a recess into that by clip curving that in. It's another great technique there, by the way, is to take your lasso and your mask lasso, and then hold the Alt key, Control and Alt keys after you've drawn some masking, and tap, and it'll harden the edge of that masking. Then if we invert that and I take my clip curve brush, you'll see we get this, at least this beginning of a really hard sort of shape there. Okay, so now I'll polish that again, and we'll clay polish it. And the clay polish is just still going to help us return some of those harder edges back in. So now you see it's starting to get an even more mechanical look to that area. I might go through and continue some of that. Let's take that mask lasso and follow some of these contours that were starting to be created when I was just playing around with that hard surface brush. And let's follow those through. This is kind of the fun part for me of doing mechanical stuff, because I get to play with shapes and volumes and ideas that don't really work for creatures, which creatures are my bread and butter, and everybody kind of knows that. But I actually like doing this hard surface stuff just as a kind of way to give myself sort of a mental break from always having to be, on point with anatomy. With this, there really isn't anatomy, and you have a completely different set of design considerations to have in mind. So that can be a lot of fun to play around with. So now let's take this stuff and clay polish it. Then we'll Dynamesh that again. So we start out with these general volumes that build ourselves a silhouette. Then we start removing sections and kind of carving away and figuring out, okay, this area will be cool for some mechanical stuff to show through in. And here we want it to feel like these things are supposed to socket together, but they have some distance. Stuff like that. There's a lot of cool things you can do with that. So let's go ahead, though, and turn off our local symmetry. Then we're going to mirror and weld so we get our shapes there. And we're really starting to generate a real sense of silhouette now with these shapes. And I might even go ahead and add in a few extra little bells and whistles that are, well, let's go load up. Actually, I'll show you guys really quickly how to load up an insert brush. Okay, there's a number of different ways to do that. I tend to place brushes where I can get to them through my light box. Or you can just go into your brush menu and hit load brush. So here I have a brush that I've made called Mecha Large Part Prefabs, which you guys will be getting access to that. It'll be a free download. And so once that's loaded, then if I hit my M key, and with this freebie, by the way, I also included a quick video guide to how to use it. So I'm not going to go super in depth on using an insert brush right now because the information on how to do that is actually included with the tools themselves that we're giving away. So here, though, inside this brush, you can see I have a number of these mechanical details already prefabbed. So let's take this little guy right here, and if I just click and drag that on our surface, you can see, we bring that into place, and we could just rotate that around, then move it, or let's undo and draw that in maybe right here like this. Okay, and then we can maybe stretch that out a little bit. Let's invert our masking and pull some pieces down over it as though it would connect. And also, again, I'm going to do this with local symmetry turned on and only half the model there. So let's come back here and just drag this guy into place. There we go. Now I'm going to rotate it. Pull that down there. Let's rotate it again. Now let's just take that move, transpose, and stretch it. And this is just to kind of shove something in there that gives me an idea of, some cool mechanical stuff going on. So now let's turn our symmetry, and we'll move, grab a move brush, and let's move just this area right here down as if that were going to socket into it. And it lets us play with that shape just a little bit there. So once I start doing inserts into a Dynamesh like this for concept's sake, I might go ahead and polygroup these, and polygroup everything else, and then in my Dynamesh settings turn on groups. That way it keeps these as separate polygroups, so I could then go in and say move topological and wiggle that stuff around, or I could even go in and just use it as a basis to sculpt from on some things. We could just smooth it out, and it's just there as a volume to kind of say, yeah, we know we want something connecting right there. So again, this stuff is all kind of this is a fun stage. This is really where you get to cut loose with a lot of designiness and just play around with neat stuff. Now ZBrush has a number of insert brushes already in it by default that are really handy. So let's go pull some things out of one of those. Let's go to IMM machine parts. So you hit B on your keyboard, that brings up your brush menu. I'm going to go to IMM machine parts, and you'll see that has a number of pretty slick little doodads. That's a technical term for you. Little doodads in it there. And if you hold your mouse over anything inside a mesh insert brush, it'll give you a preview. So let's hit M, and then let's grab, what do we want? What do we want? Let's just grab something that's going to give us another piece there to play around with. So we start to kind of envision some forms that we want to use eventually in finishing out a shape. Okay. So we might have some piston looking things like that that come down and connect into other parts of a leg. And then let's do some stuff right here like that. Maybe not too far with that. So, and again, I'm going to Dynamesh that with groups intact. So now we get just some generalized shapes out there that are just a guide for where things are going to go eventually. Okay. So the nice thing about working with Dynamesh but with groups turned on is that you can quickly hide different pieces, and that's going to let us come back in and work with things in some really interesting ways. So like let's just maybe let's grab this much of this guy. Okay. And then I'm holding Control and Alt to tighten up that masking. If I hold Control and just tap it, then it blurs the masking, which is kind of nice because if you alternate between that and holding the Alt key down with Control, you can blur it, and then when you tighten it back up, when you sharpen it back up, it actually refines quite a bit. So that's got kind of an interesting use to it. I'm still not real happy with that shape there, though. So let's just come back in, draw some of this, draw some of this. Right, and so now let's harden that up a little bit. I could probably spend a lot of time refining that shape, actually. That's the kind of thing that I will start to get very, very OCD about and can end up eating up a lot of time. So I'm going to try to discipline myself out of that at the moment so that I don't keep you guys watching something kind of boring there. Let's just let's come back in here with a little H polish. Now if you hold the Alt key while you H polish, you'll see that it pulls out, which is kind of handy. And then I'm holding Shift. So H polish is kind of like my go-to brush for doing a lot of mechanical stuff. You can see right there we start to get some really nice shaping out of that. Okay. Let's bring that down. I just wanted to refine this a little bit more since it really was starting to show me where it wanted to go. And I know that's kind of an odd sounding way to put it, but it really is true. Like as you play around with stuff like this, as you work with it, you really start to find as you kind of twiddle around with shapes and play around with it, you start to find where it's almost like it starts telling you where it wants to go, and it becomes a lot like things you'll hear traditional sculptors talk about, with the marble tells me what's inside it. Well, it kind of does in a really weird way. It's not some weird, metaphysical sort of thing. Oops. Let's just redraw this back on the stage. So let's just kind of smooth some of this out, refine that a little bit. I'm going to clay polish a few times. So I think now we've got a really nicely defined shape. Let's turn that local symmetry off. Then we're going to mirror and weld it. So now let's build out the rest of this shape that I was talking about a moment ago. Let me grab a quick drink of water. Here we go. Alright, so from here I want to add a new subtool onto this. There's a lot of different ways that we could actually work with this. We could work from a new subtool. That's what I'm thinking, is a new subtool. We could also pull shape from these guys, just extract stuff and then push it over and start modeling that around. But I'm going to start with something that's very, very solid, very mechanical and perfect. So let's hit append, and then we're going to append a sphere 3D, and we'll go down to that new subtool, and I'm turning my perspective off so that I'm working orthographically. We'll turn on our symmetry, and now I'm going to move that sphere up. This will actually make a really interesting counter to the shape that I have for the walker that I've been working on. So here I'm just using transpose tools to kind of move this around and create this sort of interesting bulb. And if we turn on transparency, I can see our figure posed in that cockpit seat inside there. Okay. Cinder Blue asks, is there a way to sculpt RHS? I'm thinking that means right-handed. I feel silly for not knowing what that means, but is there a way to sculpt right and mirror and weld to left? I always find a model right-handed for some reason. You know, kinda. You can work from the, like, I actually for years have worked from the left. Right now you see me working from the right, the model's right-hand side. It's actually far more natural for me to work from the left, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But if I do, then, like, if I were working on these legs and I wanted to work on them from the left, then what I would do is delete by symmetry, and then just mirror this across to here and work with it this way. And sometimes it's also good to do that, to work on something from one side or the other that you know you're just going to mirror later. Because when you switch it and you start working on it from the other side, your brain kind of has a little hiccup. And that hiccup can be good because it's going to make you think about it in a different way. So sometimes it's actually good to flip things across the axis and work on them from the other side for a minute. Yeah, so we could switch this over. Just looking in the chat, responding to Cinder Blue here. Yeah, this is what I would do to work from the left-hand side. Is I would just delete by symmetry and then flip it over, and work from this side. So, but whenever you go to mirror it again, you have to flip it back. So. ZBrush's coordinate system and all of its calculations are based on right side positive, so you always have to kind of keep that in mind, or you could end up cutting your models in half and doing some really weird things. So we'll flip it back over, and then then mirror and weld it, and we'll get that back. Okay, so let's go back to our sphere that I was stretching around a bit. Okay, and we're going to dynamesh that guy, and let's turn on our polyframe with lines so we can see the wires on that, just to see how much resolution we're actually creating when we do it. Give that a second. It's probably going to be a lot. Yeah, it's more than I need right there. So let's just, there we go, that's better. So now I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques with this sphere for working this out into some shapes that will play well to create a new silhouette for this, kind of expanding out into some mechanical ideas. So if we think about these leg pieces, these long top kind of forward oriented thigh pieces here, those would have an arc to them as they turn. Okay, so those would turn, and we know that we're going to have some clearance. And I'm thinking what would be kind of neat with this is if on this particular design the pilot got in from the front down here. So maybe we have a hatch that lowers down, like the entire front is a hatch that drops down, and the pilot actually walks up through the hatch. And thinking about that also kind of brings to mind that you want to sort of think those sort of things through when you design this kind of thing. You want to think, how does the pilot get in? How does the pilot guide this thing? And where do the controls sit? How do they sit inside there? Are there places they need to reach? Are there things that they need to reach to be able to, I don't know, do on-the-fly maintenance? You know, do they need to be able to reach into an engine compartment? Can they crawl out the top? Do they have an escape hatch? And you can really get kind of crazy with the amount of things to start thinking about creatively with, you know, what are the design needs of a vehicle like this. And even though what we're designing is fantastical and science fiction, it still has all the same requirements and considerations that need to be given to anything that, you know, if we were designing something for a car company or designing something that we're actually going to get produced in the really real world, you want to give things those same design considerations so that it has that feeling of plausibility. If you don't have plausibility in your designs, then the designs kind of fall flat, which means in an artistic sense, you're not really conveying, you know, a believable story. And for us in the 3D content market, you're not giving the artists who are going to buy and use your product something with which to convey a believable story. So the design considerations are actually still the same, and you want to keep that sort of thing in mind. So let's go in right now and cut out for ourselves some shapes that we can use to generate these hatches. Okay, so let's do. Let's see. This is where things get kind of funky because I want to think through. I want to kind of play with this shape a little bit. Okay, so let's do something like this. That could be really neat. And I might even go ahead and pull a copy of this off so that I keep a clean version of this shape to build other things out of down the line. And that's probably not a bad idea, actually, thinking about it. I just have to kind of put some thought into where we're going with this. So let's do this. Let's split these poly groups off. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, actually, yeah. Before I do that, let's actually give this shell some thickness. So, again, this is Dynamesh, so topology isn't really a concern right now. Let's take ZModeler, and I'm going to just find a polygon here. I think I have, do I have my, yes, my symmetry is on. So I'm going to find a polygon that I can kind of sight up on, and then I'm going to click and drag. Oop, I think I still have flip turned on, yes. Let's go to, let's hold our spacebar down, hit extrude, polygroup all for our actions, and now let's extrude. Is that going to let me extrude in? No. Well, that kind of sucks. Alright, so let's recut that shape that I was going for. Do something like that. And let's do this way then. We will unweld our groups. Okay. So over in the geometry menu, we go to unweld groups border, and if I hit polish, you'll see that breaks these apart. So I don't actually want them broken apart, but I do want them unwelded. Okay, so now that those are unwelded, I should be able to do an extrude all polygons, push that in, and then maybe not quite that thick. Let's go about that far in. Of course, you can see we have back-facing polys right there. Everything's flipped, so let's flip our faces. And then if I auto-group that, well, in theory, it should have popped those apart. So let's just whoop, come back. Let's keep our cut there. We're going to unweld that again. And this is a neat little trick. I actually am looking at this now thinking I want to put a little gap in there. So let's store a morph of this and then polish it once. And that's too big of a gap. And the reason I stored that morph is once I polish this, then I can go dial that morph back, close that gap up enough that I know it's still there. I know this is all going to match up nice and tight, but I also know that these shells are separated. So now when I want to extrude I know that I'm actually going to get my two separate shells that I want. So now let's flip those faces. Okay. And if I auto group that, now I'll have that perfect shell. Okay. So one reason to do that is so that I can get the shell that I can retopologize later, or I could even Z-remesh and keep that thickness, but also keep that nice smooth geometric shape that I had in there to begin with. So I'm going to undo back a little bit, because once I was able to look at that shell cut away like that, I don't really like where that shape was leading, and I need to make a couple of sculptural changes to this shape before I go there. So let's turn on some transparency. Let's take a clip curve, and now we're back to working with just the closed volume, and it doesn't have any of that thickness added to it. So let's just pop back in here. So now let's take my clip curve, and we'll do a little bit of flattening on the underside there. And now I'm going to look at this. I'm going to hold shift and snap my view to the front, and then rotate ever so slightly. Let's turn those lines off ever so slightly, and you'll see that if I use a clip curve on that from that angle, that's the kind of shape that we get. Okay, so I'm going to keep that angle and then just drop myself a couple of interesting flat planar lines in here, just to kind of break this up and start marrying this whole shape into the other stuff that we already have. Okay, so now let's go to a side view, and I definitely want to rough out a little bit more shape on this before I go making those kind of cuts and trying to pull things away, because that's kind of an important part, an important stage to hit this stuff at. So now let's mask some of this off, and then I'm going to use that clip curve to pull that straight back. So now we've got this nice flat area that we could put an engine in. We do all kinds of cool stuff with that. Let's turn our transparency on. Maybe throw a hard shape right there. And then let's recalculate the Dynamesh. Polish that once, and then clay polish that a few times. Okay, so here we have this kind of a shape going on, and I like that this is giving me a little more visually to sort of think about in terms of maybe a better sort of approach to the hatch in the front. I like that. I like where that's headed. So let's come in here and maybe harden some of this stuff up a little bit. Or not. I don't know. I get torn over that kind of thing really easily. So let's see. And I think I'm going to actually borrow the engine from what I've already made, just to show you guys another little bit of use of insert mesh. So let's go grab that Mecha Large Parts insert brush, and you'll see here there's a piece in here labeled engine. And so I could just come back in here right now and take that and drop in this large engine piece if I want. And then we can move that into place. Maybe scoot it down a bit so that these sockets are here where the legs would meet up with it. Or we could just push this here, and then eventually we'll change the legs so that they meet those socket areas. You know, we could do a lot of different stuff with that. It's at this point, that's part of the beauty of a design phase. You know, when you're in the design phase, you have leeway. You can do whatever you want with it. So let's kind of squeeze that down, maybe move that into place a bit, and I think I want to tighten that up. That's good. That's good. And let's break this off into its own subtool. So I'm going to hide that, and we'll go to split hidden. So now we can see that engine back there. And let's hide those legs and work with just the pod and the engine. So let's do a little bit of, let's do something interesting here. I want to play with some designs, some shaping. So let's add some cuts like this. Like this maybe. It's kind of interesting. I can dig that. And then let's just where do we want to go here? Where do we go now? Let's pull. You know, I kind of like the idea. I like this shape here, and I kind of like the idea of having that entire shape be able to cut away for where the pod would actually flip open. All right. So now let's grab this, and again, it's Dynamesh, but I'm going to use my Z-Modeler tool, or Z-Modeler brush, and extrude this poly group out. So now I can see that poly group extruding. I see that it's kind of headed out past the shape there, so that's good. The engine shape. Now let's just clip the bottom a bit. Maybe we're going to clip these sides a little bit. And then let's Dynamesh that, polish it, and then clay polish that. Alright. So here we're really starting to get some solid silhouette. We're getting some good design information for ourselves just in what we've ended up with from experimenting and working with different shapes. So let's take a second here to carve into this this back piece right here, and I'm going to do this in kind of a nifty sort of way. Let's use a cube. Okay, let's go into our brushes and let's go find an insert cube. We want insert cube, not H cube. H cube is a hollow cube. Let's grab an insert cube. Pardon me. And if I hold the Alt key while I click and drag, you'll see that it makes that. You'll see that those come in as white poly groups, and they come in inverted. That tells us that these are subtractive. So now if I just move those around like so, and then I re-Dynamesh, you'll see that it cuts out that shape. Okay, so now we have that shape, and let's just let's manipulate these a little bit so that they fit kind of tightly down to the engine compartment there, or creating a compartment where the engine goes, I should say. Alright, so now let's Dynamesh that. So now you can see we're starting to get this compartment here that fits really snug with our engine. Alright. And I'm going to polish it once. Always go back, polish and then clay polish, polish and then clay polish, just to refine the shape and smooth things out. It's not really adding any detail. It's not doing, it's actually taking away from some of the sharp edges and details there when I do that, but it's smoothing out rough little artifacts and things, and it makes it, to me anyway, it makes it easier on my eyes to be able to look at it and kind of tell what I'm doing. So from there, I'm going to add some shaping into the back, and let's just do that with, we'll take the mask lasso. I'm going to hold my control key down and drag Actually, let's just drag all the way over that big chunk. And then let's pull all that backwards like that. And let's give this, this would be kind of fun. Let's give this a little bit of a fin right here, okay? All right, so let's just Control Shift, click and drag. And there we're creating this fin, which it's almost there. I probably need to Dynamesh this once before we do. There we go. Let's Dynamesh that, clay polish it. Now let's cut this neat little fin idea in here. There we go. I dig that, because now we could add like other engine stuff, or rather than cutting that or using clip curve, let's do that with a slice curve. Okay, and let's just make all this one poly group first. So by doing that with a slice curve, I should be able to hide that poly group, delete hidden, and close holes. That's going to give me, it's going to fill this in a little bit funny, so I'm still going to need to go back through and clip it, but that way I'm not going to have that artifacting off the sides that you saw earlier. So let's take my clip curve brush, that's Control Shift, then click and drag, and I'm just going to kind of gently follow that shape, and then let's re-Dynamesh it, polish it, and then clay polish. There we go. So now we get that nice little shape off the back, and I kind of dig that. I think that gives us some opportunities for some interesting design elements there. And you notice that because I did that with a trim, it's going to give me this poly group, so then I can hide everything else, and I could do some neat stuff with this as well. So at this point, I feel like we've got some really good silhouette built up here. We could do a lot of different things with this area in the back, and I'm actually tending toward thinking of that as maybe an area to put some kind of exhaust or something kind of blowing. You know, it's like the engine's got a big exhaust here, but I don't know, something. I just want to see some pipes or something there, or something. Oh, it's always so hard. Like I start thinking about shapes and getting ideas and things there, and it just gets goofy. So let's pull up another insert brush. Let's go back to the one that IMM machine parts from inside Zbrush, and we'll pull up. I don't know. Let's look around, see what we have in there. Maybe something's going to spark an idea or two. So let's do. Let's grab maybe this guy right here. Let's turn our perspective off, draw him in place, and then I'm just going to pull that into the center here. And let's follow that out to here. Okay, like so. And then we'll just clip curve that down. Cool, I like that. I dig that shape a lot. So now let's make sure that this other stuff is all poly grouped. Even though I really like having that shape, I'm kind of torn. Actually, let's put this off in its own subtool. That way I don't lose this piece back here. Let's split hidden, and then I'll go down to this guy to finish adding in some greebles into this area. But this way I can Dynamesh it, and I don't lose any of the groups or pieces from that hull that I was working on there. So let's turn that up just a little bit. That might be a bit much. Let's polish and then clay polish, because again, we are just designing. This is all this is. This is just the design phase of putting all the stuff together, so I know all the shapes I need when I go to actually model and build all that detail out with final topology. So from here, let's add in a few more bits and bobs. Let's go to our mesh insert tool that we have selected, and let's see. We could do all kinds of cool stuff with this. Where we're going to go? Let's grab. Let's grab one of this guy. He looks interesting to me, and we'll just drag that out. Let's turn off that perspective. Just drag that guy out here, and then maybe pull him in. And this is a neat little trick right here. Once I've started pushing an insert mesh in like this, and everything else is masked, if I hold the control key and click and drag, then it's just going to give me a duplicate of that in place. So that's really handy stuff right there. So let's pull that, and we'll just work these around. We could call those anything, because it's, you know, that's the beauty of fiction. You know, we can make up whatever these things are. So we'll pull those in. Maybe just drag another one of these guys here. These kind of shapes are fun to play with. Alright. Let's squeeze that in just a little tiny bit. Okay, and then let's add some shapes that sort of play off of these and fill in down the back here. Let's go back to this hull, and do I have dynamic turned on there for some reason? Because it keeps wanting to, oh, let's see, there we go. So let's go back to this hull now, and I'm going to delete by symmetry. That way I can come in now and make a cut. This is one of the flaws. This is something that I think they really need to fix in Zbrush, is that slice curves don't carry over symmetry. So if I had that model still up like this, and I wanted to, like, it looks like I should have symmetry going on. Well, if I take a slice curve and I draw that, it only slices where I slice. It does not do that symmetrically. So sometimes you have to fake that sort of thing. So to do that, I'm going to delete by symmetry. I said delete by symmetry. Really? Oh, wait. Derp? Really? Oh, it still had that. Still thinking that was in there. Okay. So now it's delete by symmetry. Now we'll show this poly tool, or excuse me, this poly group. And I'll take my slice curve brush, and I'm just going to trace this outline right here, like so. And let's maybe do that too. Now let's make that stuff a poly group, Control Shift G. And I'll mirror and weld. So now that I have that, I can take this poly group. I don't want that everywhere. I just want that much of it. So I've just cut that part. So now let's mask everything except this bottom piece, and then we can Control Shift click and drag to pull some pieces out like that. It's kind of interesting, but I'm not really digging it. I'm not feeling that shape. That's not doing it for me. So let's try something a little different here with that. Let's pull that out, and then let's just invert our mask. And oh, I said invert my mask. Hello. So now that, I wanted to poly group that by masking, although it did not pick up everything. So let's hide all that. There we go. Now we've got a poly group made from the section that I just pulled out there. And then I'm going to hide everything except that. Actually, no. Let's just dynamesh the whole thing. Polish and clay polish. Okay. So now, here we go. Now I'm going to do a little bit of cutting. Actually, using clip curve here. And let's just clip curve that to some nice angles there. Although, man, the clip curve makes me mad sometimes. I really wish it didn't create those artifacts. So we're going to slice it instead. So let's slice that. And then, yeah. Let's hide it. Delete hidden. Sometimes that does wacky stuff too. That's kind of angry. Oh, I always hate it when it starts doing that. Once you start really trying to refine shapes with Dynamesh, you can run into some weird issues when you're doing mechanical stuff. Because, like I was showing, if I take that slice curve and I cut it, that's fine. But then when I fill that hole in, it does goofy crap. So let's take if we take the clip curve and we refine it, you'll see it's nice and clean. It's going to keep our volume, but it's also going to take bits of that mesh and flatten them into this weird thing. So I have a love-hate relationship with that whole process. It's very irritating at times. So let's try clipping this straight once. Now if we clip it straight, it seems to work out pretty well. So then let's clip it here. We'll just do it in bits. Okay, so that's going to work out much better. So we clipped it straight, and then we came back and just clipped it off the rest of the way in stages. And then we can mask everything and just drag that stuff back in. So that's kind of a neat shape like that. I like that. I like having this stuff up in here. I want to increase my Dynamesh resolution at this point. I'm starting to get some details going that I don't necessarily want to lose. So let's turn that Dynamesh up a bit, re-Dynamesh it, and then we will polish this and hit my clay polish a few times. So here at this point, I feel like we have a really solid concept together. The last thing that I want to do with it, though, that I started to do a little while ago, is pull a hatch out of here. So let's do that now. Let's go through here and hit our slice curve, and let's go down. Let's do a curve, another curve. Okay, and then that should give us a nice clean poly group off the front. Then I'm going to break that poly group off, I think. Yeah, is that how I want to do that? Yes, it is. So I'm going to pull a couple of kind of nifty little tricks here. Okay, so I just broke that poly group off the front. I don't need to add thickness to all of this. In fact, adding thickness in this back area here would not only be unnecessary, but it really screws some stuff up. So I'm going to go through and first off, I want to do a little bit of refinement with something right here. I want to this edge. I think I want to kind of make that all much cleaner and a much straighter angle at this point. So let's just clip curve that in like so. And I kind of dig where that leads. And then also out of that, I think I want to clip this hull, this front hull piece off. Okay, so I'm going to clip this. I'm going to use a slice curve and slice this off like so. And then let's group all of this together. Okay. And then this guy is grouped right here. And let's break that front piece off. We're going to hide it and split it into its own subtool. And now I'm going to fill this back chamber here. We'll go to Modify Topology and hit Close Holes. And since that was clipped nice and flat, we get a nice flat surface there. So that's actually pretty cool. We could use that in a lot of ways to trace over it with topology. And so now we have our main hull area right here that we pulled off, that we split off into a subtool. And let's take this, let's turn my lines back on, and let's see, first off I want to close my holes on this. Okay, so now I get a flat fill in the back. And of course the front's not going to give me a flat fill, but when you close holes, it creates polygroups for those. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, click on them, and then I'm going to hit Control Alt A to auto group them. I'm not sure if that's a default key command, by the way. I think that might be one that I made custom. So the reason that I wanted those auto grouped is so that I could hide just that front one. I want to keep this back polygroup. I like that one. That guy is nice and flat. That's going to work well for where we're headed to next. The next thing I'm going to do is give this that thickness. Okay, so now let's come in here, and I don't like how it has that weird little cut sticking in there, but this is just design phase stuff, so I'm not really going to stress on that too much. The next thing I want to do is take my Z modeler, and we're going to extrude. Okay, hold spacebar, set polygon actions to extrude all polygons, and then I'm going to pull that out. So now we should have some thickness. Okay, we should have thickness for all of that, and it should press back into this guy back here. Our hatch should be seated perfectly into that. And then from there, I should, in theory, I've been wrong before, but I should in theory be able to re-dynamesh that. And then we can polish it and clay polish it. So polish a couple times, and then we will clay polish that. Okay. So now we've got that nice little pod of a shell there. It's going to match up really tight, especially once we pull an extrusion from this guy right here. Okay, once we pull an extrusion from this, then we can actually pull the outer edges to make it match up even tighter. So, and I'm just going to delete these little guys right here that I can see, because they're fighting me. They're unruly. So let's delete hidden. Okay. And then just like I did with that back piece of hull, let's take our Z modeler, and we'll do an extrude all polygons. I'm going to pull that out, and that's going to give me a nice group right here that I can do some really nifty stuff with. So let's grab those two polygroups and hide them. Okay, and now I'm going to extrude this polygroup back, and you'll see we have a polygroup at the outer edge and then two on the inside. So now if I pull those on the inside, you're going to see I get this lip. So now we have that kind of shape. Again, this is all design phase, so if there's some artifacting here and there, that's okay. It's not a big deal. So we can just pull these guys. I'm holding Control and Shift to click and hide things or show things. And I did a little auto group there. I want to get this outer shell and this inner shell hidden, so then I can polygroup all of this stuff, which I just did. And then I'm going to do another extrusion on that. Okay, like so. And then polygroup all that. Okay, so now let's dynamesh it. Polish it a little bit. Clay polish it a couple times. It's not bad. Not bad for a design sculpt anyway. And the nice thing about having that pulled off in this way is if I want to check it and just see if I'm in the ballpark of what I was thinking with a hatch that would drop down so the driver could climb up in, I'll hit store morph target. It's a neat little way to check things. And then just drag or rotate transpose line, and we'll rotate that down, and so now you see what we have. So that is kind of a walkthrough of my process for building or designing. This is design phase stuff, but this is my process generally speaking, for designing mechanical, mecha, sci-fi type vehicles and things. If you go back and look through the Dark Void series, you'll see that there's a number of ships that we did that are just exteriors. There's a series of kits that are pieces of ships that you could kind of kit bash together to slam into making new ships that are great for off in the distance. And then there's the interiors and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of the hard surface stuff in that. Especially, there's one particular ship that's actually a complete ship with a cockpit and all kinds of cool stuff. And the way that most of that was made was generally using some combination of techniques like what you're seeing here in this demonstration. So hopefully this gives you some food for thought. That's really what this is for. There's a lot more seminars that we've done in the past that deal with very specific techniques and tell you this is how you do this. This is how you extrude this. The thing that I wanted to focus on here with this, with today's session, and kind of the theme of some of the sessions coming up, is more conceptual. All right, I want you to think in terms of the art, think in terms of creating volume, creating silhouette, and then work through with some of the techniques that hopefully you guys have picked up by now. Work through those kind of ideas to build something of your own in this vein. I find it strangely satisfying building science fiction stuff. There's something about it that is really interesting, and it puts my brain in a different place than I normally am at dealing with monsters and characters. So hopefully you guys will experiment with some of this kind of stuff and have some fun with it. I would love to see a whole slew of interesting vehicles and things come out of this group of people, or even just some show me some screenshots of attempts and trial and error at different things, because there's so much room for that. It's like you can dream and imagine and be so wildly imaginative with it that that's something that in a business sense I can tell you very bluntly is really needed. The market that we have with this content needs you to dream wildly, needs you to be creative. Instead of doing maybe things that are the same kinds of products that a lot of other people do, be creative. Come up with a new machine, a new vehicle, a new creature, any of that kind of stuff. Really put your imagination out there and have some fun with it. So before I go, I'm going to switch back over to my finished or nearly finished mecha, and you can see there's a few things that I did kind of differently. I played with something that's a little more style-wise. I really was heavily influenced on this by the kinds of machinery I loved growing up in movies like Aliens and RoboCop. There's a heavy influence of those things in there. And I think it shows, especially when you get into some of the mechanisms that you see inside the legs. And then, of course, all the greebles and things that are in the cockpit. And that stuff's just fun. So, and I think I need to check the schedule and see what I have on tap next. We might be doing one that's just on, building up the cockpit and using that kind of stuff. Pretty sure next week, though, is on UVs and topology. And Jason, 3D Loki, if he's in the chat, if you could maybe take a quick look for me and see what's on tap next week. So I can kind of give people a little taste of what's to come. We're going to be following this particular mech all the way to completion, and you're going to see this thing through its entire design cycle. So, and along the way, the freebies and things we'll be providing are going to be different assets, insert meshes, texturing brushes, texturing utilities, all kinds of different little pieces and parts that go along the way toward creating something like this. So, see, next week is Mechaniacal. I love stupid names like that, you guys. Forgive me for the goofiness. But next week is Mechaniacal Part 2, continuing with our all-terrain walker development. We'll be looking at topology and UVs for this kind of sci-fi mechanical model. So next week we're going to be getting into topology. Topology is fun stuff. Not really. On something like this, topology is so finicky. It's picky. It's such nitpicky stuff. And if you're not thinking about your UVs when you do that topology, you will absolutely work your way into so many corners that you'll just want to scream before it's done. So forethought is key. That's why the design phase of something like this is so important. So that design phase is where we get to not be picky, where we get to have fun and just spitball shapes and do goofy stuff. Then we get into that topology. Man, when you hit that topology, it is another story. So we're going to be looking at that next week, and I'm going to do some topology live. But the amount of topology in something like this, the amount of topology generation in this, there's many hours of work involved in that. So you won't see an entire topology done. What you'll see is samples and demonstrations of different segments of topology, different types of topology that give you a look into the considerations that you need to make so that you don't work yourself into those corners I was talking about. And then I'll also be demonstrating a few things about the UVs and why that topology is so important to have in mind as you develop those UVs. So guys, I actually went about 15 minutes over today, which is not as bad as I've gone over before on some videos, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this session. I know it has been just slammed wall to wall with information and technique. Like, I didn't let up. We were going 120 miles an hour the whole time. And I actually like working that way. That's how I tend to be most of the time, is just full bore, pedal to the floor the whole time was what I really like to do. The downside of it is it didn't give me a lot of time to interact with you guys in the chat, and I apologize for that. I will take a second here and say, if anyone has any questions or anything that I might be able to go over kind of quickly, just or things to keep in mind for next time to answer, you guys feel free to pop some of that stuff into the chat here before I close this out. So also, I didn't do my usual thank yous to everybody, which I'll do right now while you folks maybe take a moment to think of any questions you have in the chat. I always like to give shout outs to people. I see Cajun Beauty, who is usually here. She's very cool. Cinder Blue, who I think I talked to in the first hour a little bit. We had Russ Barrett joining us today. Let's see. Reggie Hicks. Reggie, thanks for being there. And let's see, Anita Amaranth. So glad to have you, Anita. Then, let's see, Nick Silver was here. Hi, Nick. My good buddy Brent Bowers was with us today. Brent, I saw you in there in the chat too, whipping people up in a frenzy, getting people talking and stuff. That's cool. I like it when Brent's here. He always manages to get some conversation going. I like that. Jay Hudson, I see your name in the chat there. How you doing today, sir? Then let's see, Matthew Pitts. Lord, we had a good little number of people hanging out in the chat today. That was kind of awesome. Wish I had gotten a chance to look over at it, but I was just hitting it hard. Anybody else? Let's see, scanning down through. Colonel Sanders was with us. How you doing, Colonel? Then who else? Anybody? I think that might be about it. I don't see any other names popping up. If you were there and I happened to miss giving you a little shout out here at the end, just remind me of it next time, and I'll be sure to say hi to you on the air with everybody here. So thanks as always to oh wait, all right, yeah, it doesn't look like I have too many questions on here at the moment, so that's cool. Thanks as always to Jason, aka 3D Low Key, and Miss Terry from CGBytes. These guys rock. CGBytes rocks. You guys need to check them out. Make sure that you reach out to Terry for a vendor application, get all that kind of stuff in place, get some products lined up with us, and also just as a little aside there, because I don't think I've mentioned it in a little while, I do act on a consultant basis for CGBytes as their artist, their director of artist development. And what that means is I do these things to help teach you guys so that you can create even cooler content than what you might already be doing. And I'm kind of on call, so you guys can reach out to me through here, through Skype, through Facebook, all kinds of places. Any of the social media places that you might normally run into me, I'm there. You can Google my name and get contact for me. I do not hide. So so you guys are more than welcome to reach out to me for help on things, and just to maybe get an assist or some thoughts on something you may be stuck with or something. Anyway, I'm here and available to help you guys out with this stuff, because that's what it's all about. I want to see you guys make more cool stuff. So thanks again to CGBytes for putting these things together and having me on each week to help you guys with all that stuff. Thanks to everybody who came and hung out. Remember, as always, like, share, subscribe, all that cool stuff that is kind of the YouTube standard operating procedure. Till next time, as always, I am Les Garner from 6S1 Media here on the CGBytes channel, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.